Well, I'm launching the next 20 or so episode podcast. And this one is going to be on the great figures of anarchism. The greatest anarchists as theorists, the greatest anarchist theorists, philosophers, thinkers, intellectuals, not necessarily the greatest anarchist revolutionaries, doing whatever revolutionaries do, peaceful or violent. And I mean, I guess I'll mention some of the people we'll talk about. This won't surprise people who know something about anarchism. I think the first episode will be about ancient anti-authoritarianism. I'm going to talk about Diogenes the Cynic and Lao Tzu, two of my favorite philosophers. Both of them I regard as anarchists, or close enough to be getting on with. I think Lao Tzu is completely clear, actually, in the Tao Te Ching, that you basically don't want any government. Absolutely as little as possible. You spoil a fish with too much poking. And then, maybe the usual anthologized figures, William Godwin, Josiah Warren, I don't know, not anthologized enough. Lysander Spooner. Maybe you think about these as all anarchists, or maybe not. If you're on the right or the left, or you think right or left matters, which I totally disagree with you about if you do, then you might not think of Warren and Spooner as being similar to Proudhon, Bakunin, Kropotkin, the great 19th century European anarchists. And, then we'll do some 20th century, of course. And we'll fetch up, although, 20th century per se was not we'll talk about Chomsky, and we'll talk about some figures early in the century, Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman, among others, and Kropotkin. But the 20th century was not a golden age of anarchist philosophy, and we'll try to say why, too. And we'll finish up with James C. Scott and David Graeber, who I think are the most important anarchist theorists since Kropotkin. Okay, I especially want to concentrate a lot on Scott, who's an amazing thinker, the late James C. Scott. All right, so let me do a couple things here. First of all, how I became an anarchist and why I'm an anarchist. I guess it happened in 7th grade. I was raised by Marxists, my mother and my stepfather, both kind of history teachers and very much on the Marxist tip. My mother was a red diaper baby who was raised by Communist Party members. And my parents were both, I would say, socialists, kind of pretty far left, as that, they were probably the most leftist people in their social circles in D.C. and stuff like this, or, close, anyway. So Marxist approaches to social science as teachers and thinkers, readers, but then also kind of a politics of resistance to capitalism, and they were very active in the teachers' unions and things like this. Okay, now I would say that starting in 6th grade, I could see of myself already that I was an extremely anti-authoritarian person. When a teacher or a parent told me to do something, it got to the point pretty quick, 12, 13, where that was enough reason not to do it. And also, why do you think you can tell me what to do? Particularly with the teachers, right? Like, pretty early I'm going like, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you where to walk, how to talk and shit like this. So get the fuck out of my face. All right. So, I'm talking about anti-authoritarianism as a personality trait. You could say dysfunction if you want. I think it's pretty functional. It's less dysfunctional than pro-authority personalities, in my opinion. People are aware that anti-authoritarians have a personality disorder. They think they do, but few are aware that authoritarians have obvious personality disorders and ethical disorders. Okay, so I'm in 7th grade. I'm starting to become politically aware, and it's a time of Vietnam War. Watergate is about to explode. I'm reading the Washington Post every day, and I'm getting a picture of the world that comports with my experience at school and stuff. That is an anti-authoritarian. A picture of the world as consisting of lots of arbitrary authorities, wielding power that cannot possibly be justified. Sticking with that, man. Not even close, dude. State power has never been justified. Not even a little. Not even for a moment. Not plausibly for a moment. Okay, so that's one reason I'm an anarchist. And I propose to prove that, or I have proven it. State power cannot be ethically justified in no form, at no time, in no way, under no ethical system. No plausible ethical system. That might be good enough, but maybe that's not good enough for you to be an anarchist. All right. All right, so I'm sitting in 7th grade, and I decide that I am a Marxist, like my parents, right? And I want it to be even more revolutionary and stuff like this. Maybe even going toward a violent revolution. So I'm reading the basic works of communism. I'm the Communist Manifesto. I've got an anthology. I'm reading Trotsky, Bukharin, Marx, Lenin. Anyone who's in that anthology, Rosa Luxemburg or whatever it might be. And I'm taking it on board. I want it. And I'm sympathizing with the revolutionary movements that are emerging all over the world and also in the United States, as we thought about it in 72. Now, I would just say that it occurred to me. It occurred to me as I read. No one told me this, I don't believe. It occurred to me as I read the classics of Marxist communism that these people are authoritarians. Nothing could be clearer. And then the actual results, like the government of the Soviet Union, the Cultural Revolution in China, which was we were in the middle of that as all this was going on. I'm going I start to fight with my parents in an extreme way. You say you're in favor of liberation. What are you people doing? Right? These are the most thorough regimes of censorship ever instituted. Okay? You're going out to execute class enemies and shit like this by the millions. Right? Your beautiful liberatory politics is monstrously wrong and hideously contradictory. You think we can achieve liberation through mass execution and total repression. You're grosser than the people you're fighting, and you're less reflective. Even though your values are right, we need liberation, we need equality, man. Really bad. I agree with everything you want, my parents. But all the ways that you're going to go about it, and all these philosophers that you're reading, and thinkers and leaders, are incredibly confused right in the most, at the key juncture. the juncture that makes the difference between something you want and something you could never, should never want in a million years. All right. So I guess one thing as I read the classics of communism, Marxist communism, I ran into references to anarchism because the Marxist communists hated anarchists. Marx hated anarchists more than capitalists. He dedicated book after book to destroying anarchism. He tried to purge anarchists from his movement and all this stuff, So there's a lot of anti-anarchism in the communist stuff I was reading. Anti-communist anarchism and stuff like this. They were rivals. But it didn't take me but a minute to realize, there is a genuinely liberatory approach. The one that these Marxists are rejecting totally. Okay? And so I started reading. And the first thing I read was a book called What is Communist Anarchism? Or the ABC of Communist Anarchism, which I think was its original title, by Alexander Berkman. And Anarchism by Emma Goldman. I found Dover editions of these for $2 or whatever it was. And I was converted, man. And after reading the Berkman, I guess I felt like I could really out-argue all these other leftists and stuff like this. And so I counted myself an anarchist. And sometimes I have referred to myself as a libertarian. But I would say that I've been an anarchist since I was 12. And I fully endorse it today as well. Now, okay, so what do we mean by anarchism? Christ, maybe I should have started there. I just mean anti-statism. We can discuss other definitions, and I could try to figure out whether I'm for or against anarchism as thus construed. And often anarchism centrally means anti-capitalism. But I think the term itself and the history of the use of the term, the primary significance of anarchism is the rejection of the political state, i.e. the rejection of government. Government being, as defined by, say, Max Weber and the Weberian type of tradition, and wide agreement in a way, government being a group of people who exercise to a reasonably effective extent a monopoly of violence over a given geographical area. Anyone who rejects the idea that a group of us should have all they need in terms of weapons and resources to monopolize violence in our society. Anyone who disagrees with that thinks that that's a bad idea, is an anarchist in my sense. So I just straight up mean anti-statism. Anarchism, for me, I'm not telling you what the real meaning ultimately is, things like that don't really make any sense, okay? Fights like that. And if you really wanted to, if you spent 20 books showing me that anarchism means something else or more, you're not going to be able to because I'm an expert too. I'll just say I'm an anti-statist and just say anti-statism in all these ways. Man, should you want to look at this? Do you see the bug situation here? Did I just show you that effectively? I don't know, man. It's pretty wild. Pretty wild bugs here in the autumn in Rappahannock County, Virginia. So that's what I mean by anarchism, rejection of the political state. Now, there's a few possible objections. One of them is that it's impossible to live without a political state, that human beings can't live without wide-scale, extreme coercion. I mean, to just start, if so, then I think we should be extinct. We're not ethically suited to continue, okay? In virtue of what should some of us have a monopoly of force on all the others? And what happens after they do? So I have written a book giving arguments for anarchism, or basically like rejecting every argument in favor of the state, refuting every argument for the existence, for the legitimacy of the state. And I'm going to insist that I blew them all up. And it was not hard. These arguments are pitiful. And I mean, you go rummaging back in my videos to find me destroying social contract or whatever. I mean, like, I'm not that proud of destroying social contract theory because it is just riddled with fallacies, like obvious fallacies. You know, someone has to say this, you know, because everyone's just going like, I love your fictions. I love your fictions, and I want your fictions to anally rape me or whatever. Like, that's what I think of statists. I don't know if that's going to be the tone of this thing or it's going to be more subdued. I guess we're floating in that direction. Let me quickly give you my instant argument for anarchism. Now, I find that people will argue with me for days, weeks, months, years. For a lot of people, this will be enough. Not to persuade them, but to make them quiet down. Like, people go to me often like, really, anarchism? Like, oh my God, I thought you were a reasonable person. Like, you seem like a pretty nice bourgeois dude or whatever, with a career in academia or journalism or whatever. Anarchism? That's just crazy. All right, I'm just telling you straight up, and this is not going to take long. The political state is the very worst idea human beings ever had. It's probably the extinction idea. It's probably the end. Okay, it's probably the last idea that we'll ever, choke on. All right. No, I don't know, man. There's later ideas. All right. First of all, it is optional. It's only existed about 3,000 years or something like that, the political state. And we've existed, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of years? How long is it? Tens? All right. But this monopoly of force thing, once you constitute it, you can't control what happens next because you've constituted a certain group of people as an irresistible force. So they can do, after that, once they're constituted as with having a monopoly of violence, whatever they want. Okay. Let's just, if we were pro-state, what would we do? How would we talk about the problems of the 20th century? What sort of entity prosecuted the world wars? What were those wars between? What sort of entities or objects were those wars between, conflicts between? Well, states, and that's why hundreds of thousands of people died. That's why there was beautiful innovation in weapon systems, patriotic scientists, right? These organizations with vast resources under the auspices of coercive taxation, almost infinite resources, okay, in comparison to previous prosecutors of conflicts. Who invented mustard gas, dude, and who deployed it? All right. What sort of entity, what sort of thing performed all the genocides of the 20th century? What sort of object, what sort of idea led to the Holocaust, the killing fields, okay, the Belgian Congo, the Armenian genocide, the Cultural Revolution, the forced collectivization of agriculture, Sudan, who's killing people in Rwanda, who could do a genocide? Only a fucking state. Okay, so statists, you love those millions of deaths, don't you? Okay, well, you don't have any way to avoid them once we swallow your basic political idea. There's no way to stop the killing fields once it rolls out. What are you going to do? Lay in front of the tank? That's your best bet because you've constituted a political state. So millions will die. I think that it's not a coincidence that that a government is what invented atomic weaponry. Only governments could make atomic weapons. So far, only governments have. Very likely, or, 50-50, that will end all life on Earth. Certainly all human life. You might think that climate change is going to be an extinction event. Well, it might be over the next 400 years. Okay. We'll be adapting though. But the state-addled extinction event takes 12 seconds or whatever. Okay? All gone. Poof. Because we permitted a group of people to monopolize violence and hence to subdue the whole society, to make the whole society a hierarchy that reflects that monopoly of violence, a economic hierarchy that reflects that monopoly of violence, a racial, gender, etc. hierarchy that reflects that monopoly of violence. And once you do, you should expect to be annihilated by that force. We're not dicking around here, man. And we can talk about how or why anarchism might be practical. But if you're saying that the state is practical, then you want those 6 million in the Holocaust, those 2 million in the killing fields, those 20 million in the forced collectivizations, or whatever, man. I see what you want. So there is only one alternative to the political state, that is anti-statism. All right, so we're going to have to try to find what possible arrangements there are without pervasive coercive force. All right, that's the only possibility of a decent outcome. All the statist outcomes are annihilating. So I say, that's pretty quick, and I say, until proven otherwise, completely decisive argument against the political state in whatever that was, 5 minutes. Okay. So we're going to go on. The first episode, I think, is going to be about sort of ancient sources of anti-authoritarianism. I personally think that most anti-authoritarian thought has been repressed. Okay, but we'll talk about a few examples that have survived, such as Diogenes, the cynic, and Lao Tzu, the Taoist. And then we'll go on to the great and quite underrated William Godwin, father of Mary Shelley, among other things, husband of Mary Wollstonecraft. And then we'll be off. Probably Josiah Warren will be the next after that. I guess I'll just share that I think the two greatest anarchist thinkers up until Graeber and Scott in the 90s or whatever were Peter Kropotkin on the communist side. We'll be exploring these differences. And Lysander Spooner on the individualist side. Anarchism has not always had the most impressive theorists, not as impressive as probably liberalism or Marxist communism. But that doesn't mean that it's false. That's episode 1.